Are you a leader, manager, entrepreneur, business owner, or knowledge worker? Are you leading people or wondering how to be a better leader in your own life and work? If you are, then you can be experimenting better. Welcome to The Experimental Leader, a podcast that takes a look at the ways leaders are experimenting in their own work. Hosted by Melanie Parrish, we dive into real-life conversations about how people might be using a scientist's mindset and experimenting in their work. Shift your leadership into something that works better. Join us on The Experimental Leader today.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our live show, The Experimental Leader. I am so excited to be here with you today. It's going to be a great show. And I've been really thinking about experimenting in my own life. For the last 2 weeks, I did a diet. And, I don't really like diets. The research doesn't really bear out that diets help you lose weight, especially not if you're a grown up. It's more genetics than dieting. You can lose weight short term, but to keep it off, it's not great. But I really have this thing in my life where I try not to be a procrastinator. And I kept having this diet pop across my Facebook feed. And I kept being, maybe I should try that sometime. Maybe I should try that sometime. This probably happens to you. And so I thought, I should try it. And I kept thinking I should try it. And I try also not to live with shoulds. And so eventually I was like, I should either stop thinking I should try it or I should actually try it. So I tried it and it didn't work. And I know it didn't work. Well, it didn't work for me in 2 weeks. So the reason I knew it didn't work is because I actually did a really good experiment. So I bounded it. I knew when it started and I knew when it stopped. And I did it perfectly. I didn't cheat. I didn't try other things. I didn't have multi-variables in my experiment. I did the diet. I gave myself every chance of having it succeed. I did the learning I needed to do. I bought the products I needed to do to help support it. And I didn't lose any weight, there was actually a measurable. So I stopped. And I'm happy that I stopped. And that my thing I was doing before the diet was better than the thing I tried. So I tried the experiment. It was bounded in time. And I think it's useful to think about this because sometimes we start an experiment because we want something to change or we're curious if something might change, if we might be able to better our situation. And in fact, it doesn't get better, or the data that we collect doesn't show that the thing we're doing to try to make something happen isn't any better than the thing we were doing before. So I want to just challenge you to look at where you've started an experiment and where you should stop that experiment. Are there any experiments that you're doing in your life or any things that you're doing that are hard or take energy or emotional labor that it's time to stop? So that's my challenge to you this week is what should you stop doing because it might free up time for something else. And I am super excited about our guest today. Our guest is Greg Poirier, and he, over the last 20 years, has established himself as a capable leader and a visionary in the technology industry. He is a principal software architect at SolarWinds, and he works with engineering, product, and executive leadership to ensure SolarWind engineers are building the right thing at the right time. Not only that, but Greg has been my client for many years now. And so we're going to have a talk about leadership in technology. And also, I'm going to ask him some questions about coaching and what that's been like for him and how he thinks about coaching in his life as well. So, Greg, I am super excited to have you here today.
Hey, Melanie.
Hey, Greg, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm super excited to be here. It's always fun to talk to you, and I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, I'm super jazzed.
Well, and we're doing book club, and I know, when I wrote The Experimental Leader, it took me a long time to write it, and as I wrote it, I always had my clients in mind as I was writing it. I wrote it. I don't have a large client roster. My clients stay with me a long time. And you were one of the people who was in my mind as I wrote The Experimental Leader. And we're doing, for those of you who are just tuning in and don't know what we're up to, we're going to look at the Experimental Leader book all year. And each week, each month, we're going to look at one chapter. And we're just in the introduction phase. So we're just going to talk about the introduction, which is really all about sort of leadership. Can people learn? How do they learn leadership? All of that. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts or comments on, sort of the scientist's approach to leadership.
Yeah, no, I in rereading like the introduction in the first couple of chapters, because I just started my new position at SolarWinds and I'm trying to get my feet grounded. It was funny rereading it. I mean, you mentioned you kind of had me in mind. As I was going through it, I was just like, this is just me. 100% like just feel sort of in over my head sometimes, go through imposter syndrome. And it used to be a lot worse, years ago when we first started working together is very different. But, learning to look at problems in delivery, in every aspect of in software engineering, specifically for me, and taking a step back and saying like, okay, I see these 1,000 things, right? And sometimes you have this inclination to want to change everything at once, like burn it down and rebuild it ideally. And you can't. You have to find those bits and pieces where you're like, okay, I think I have an idea on what to do right here in this one instance that might remove some roadblocks. And so you figure out, again, like, how do you measure how bad it is? How do you decide which thing to look at first? And really learning how to have that data-driven approach, that scientific method. I have a hypothesis. I know how to measure if my hypothesis is working. And then being very sort of results-driven. It's really made things a lot more organized for me in my thinking. And I love having that systematic approach to figuring out how to lead the teams I work with.
Well, and I'm really curious because you brought up imposter syndrome, and I think I have to go on a podcast later this week. And one of the questions they sent me a whole pile of questions that I have to answer. And one of them is, how do I cure imposter syndrome? And I was like, wow, if I could do that in 20 minutes, like, wow, that would be amazing. But like, when do you think you might experience, or when do you think people experience imposter syndrome? Because I think there are certain circumstances that really elevate that.
Yeah, I mean, you say it in the book, and I can't think of a better way to put it, but it really is when you're at that area of extreme growth. You're really on the edge of your capability, and you're having to move into just unknown areas of skill. And especially in an environment where your feedback is not going to be what you might be used to when you're kind of lower on the ladder in management or as an individual contributor. You're used to having those one-on-ones, or you're getting direct feedback, or you have like code reviews, or you get routine feedback. But when you're in leadership and you're not writing code, or you're not writing feature specs, or doing whatever, it's really, I have to sit back and watch and see what's happening, what influence am I having on people. And it can be really unnerving to have to take time and to be comfortable with uncertainty. It just, on those growth edges, that's where you get it the most.
Well, and I think a new job really puts you up against those growth edges, like immediately and quickly. I think as you get comfortable in a job, your day fills, so you don't have so many empty spaces.
Yeah.
I know one thing I see new leaders do is they want like constant feedback from the people below them. They want sort of constant affirmation. Like, even if they get an attaboy last month, they need it again this month.
Right.
And that's just kind of not what the people who report to us are for. but it's painful because we're stretching so far when we're in that uncomfortable place, and we have this need for that constant affirmation, and yet there's no one in our chain of command whose job it is to give it to us. And so the days can be pretty empty, especially in a new job, as you try to figure out what you will busy your time with.
Yeah, and it turns out that you're going to busy your time wondering if you're doing things fast enough or good enough. And in the absence of real work to do, it turns out that thinkers think. And, in a vacuum, I think we try and think of, what can we be doing? How can we do it faster? How can we get to delivering value faster? And it's this like vicious cycle of anxiety that only feeds imposter syndrome.
Well, and okay, so it can be a vicious cycle. And then there's the other side of that, which is it's also, I think there's also that glorious fresh eye that you have coming into an organization that you never get again.
No.
You never get that sort of unbiased look at things because you become, as you're stepping into a system, you aren't yet completely part of the system yet. So you don't have skin in the game in the same way. You don't have your project that you've put your heart and soul into. You have fewer blind spots. So in the same way that you aren't busy, you also have this fresh way of seeing the organization for what it is.
Yeah, and really leaning into that and embracing that freshness. That's how you kind of get out of the imposter syndrome spiral. You just sit back and you observe, reserve judgment, really try to ask yourself why over and over again, and get clarity from other people, and just try not to leap into wanting to do, and instead learn and really take notes.
I want to move away from sort of the book club piece, but thank you for, diving into that with me. I'm finding it so interesting to hear sort of how other people think about the book and how they think about the concepts of the book, because none of them are unique to this book. And I think we all, like imposter syndrome, everyone has grappled with it at some point in their life. And we'd all like the answer to never feel it again because it's so uncomfortable. But I do think it tells us where our edges are. We know we're growing if we're feeling that. Something's happening in us when we're experiencing imposter syndrome. And it tells us that we are growing, developing human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think of your own leadership journey, kind of how you have cultivated that, because I think you've done an amazing job of cultivating your own journey career-wise. And I know people are very curious about that. And also, I just want to put sort of a general, hey, out there, if you're listening to this and you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat and I'm happy to answer it. Greg would be happy to answer it if you have anything you want to hear from us today.
Yeah. My ride has been wild. I really kind of got thrust into technical and organizational leadership just by virtue, I think, of having opinions. I have no shortage of opinions, and sometimes they are strong opinions, and I like to charm my way into the decision-making process a lot. So
can you say that, can you draw the line between how opinions move you into leadership?
Yeah. So I think, everyone has opinions, right? But there is a way that you can sort of, get your opinions in the right ears and start to cultivate consensus about things that pushes your ideas forward. And, as you learn to do that in a way that doesn't constantly cause friction, the people around you start to value your input and value, your judgment, especially if, your opinions and your judgments start to pay off for them, right? Mm-hmm. If what you're saying advances their goals and your goals and the shared goals of the business, then I think you kind of fall into positions where people are asking you, hey, we want you to lead this area of the product, or we really want you to kind of be over this part of the business.
Can you say more? Like, I want you to say more. I have some things to say too, but sure. It's like, how do you know, like, what are you saying specifically? Or not specifically, but what are you saying to people? What's the timeline? How early are you starting to seed these ideas?
Yeah. So usually what I do is if I see something and I'm like, okay, this needs to change. I try and get an idea of, okay, who do I need to talk to? And then I go to them and I'm saying like, hey, look, I see this problem, right? Like, we've got a couple of teams over here. I'm just going to use like a concrete example, right? We have a couple of teams over here who have inconsistent execution. And, as I've been kind of embedding with them and sneaking into meetings and being a fly on the wall, something that I've noticed is there seems to be this disconnect between, their product manager and their engineering manager, right? And so, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, right? Like, solicit input from them first, because they are going to feel heard, they're going to feel respected, and you start to build that relationship up. This sounds sort of like, yeah, I am playing social engineering over here, but like, it's like how to be a human, right? Mm-hmm. But go to them, solicit their advice, and then start to say things like, well, one thing that we could try, right? Like, we could just experiment with this, is let's just be in a meeting with them. Like, I want you to come see what's happening over here. And here's what I kind of want us to do when we go into this meeting is you and I are going to get on the same page. Like, we're not going to contradict each other in this meeting. We're going to make sure that we are kind of supporting each other's ideas or this idea or whatever. And we're going to go kind of lead them to the conclusion we want them to get to, or discover just how deep this problem is, right? Like, can they simply never agree? But really just working with other people to kind of build consensus around things, but slowly, which you can then snowball into movement for the organization. And I'm not saying you need the like 40 people to come to consensus. Really, all you need to know is who are the real decision makers here, who wield the most influence, how can I get them to see my point of view, and how can I then leverage their influence to make something happen, in the lack of your own influence or authority.
Well, and you're actually talking about, and I kind of pushed you for a concrete example, which is part of the problem, because when you have a concrete example, you're not actually just seeding ideas, but there's also just sort of starting to talk about things, sort of water cooler talk in 101s.
Yep.
I've been doing this in the Unitarian Church for about 20 years. The Unitarian Church makes their decisions at the church level through Robert's Rules of Order, which I hate. And their young adults make their decisions through consensus decision-making, formal consensus decision-making. So for 20 years, I've just been subversively working on trying to make decisions through consensus at the committee level, teaching people how to use consensus decision-making skills, talking about consensus decision-making, refusing to make decisions, without a consensus process. So I've been subversively talking about it. Now I think my husband's on a decision-making panel with the Canadian Council about decision-making, because now I'm starting to tie it to racism and social justice, because marginalized groups are less likely to know the rules of Roberts, and that's got some traction. So it's a really good way for people in power to maintain powers to use Roberts. So I tie it to everything I can because I think it's really. So anyway, so I've been seeding these ideas and just like a dog with a bone on it. But as you do that, you start to be the go-to person, like, oh, well, Mel and Melanie are the ones that you'd want to talk to about, you'd want to include them because they've been talking about this for 20 years. So somehow with no work at all, really, other than just complaining, we've become stakeholders in the process.
Yeah. I mean, that was my journey at New Relic. The job before SolarWinds is I got put on a project, sort of like a concrete, here's the thing, we just need you to deliver, right? And made it happen and built some goodwill and got a little capital. And then, they started to insert me into it was related to compliance and our, government sort of environments. And, they started to think of me, like you said, like as the subject matter expert on this thing. Yeah. Even though like I was one of multiple people that worked on this, like it just, things start to kind of get funneled to you and you start to wield more and more influence over domains where people see you as someone who knows these things, knows this stuff.
Yeah, I think this influence stuff, and if I want to break this down just a little more too, like you can't just do this out of thin air. You have to have a vision for what you want to have happen. That's there's no magic to that part. You have to have enough expertise or understanding, or even just, belief in your own value system in order to be arrogant enough to believe in what you want as the right thing in order to seed these ideas. But that's the way more important than bossing people around is that belief in yourself and what you see that you want to have happen. So much of leadership is deciding what you want to have happen in your organization and then helping seed those ideas to help people go with you there, not bossing people to get them there.
No, you're right. I mean, it takes a certain amount of charisma. It really does. And in lieu of charisma, of just having a stellar vision that people see as a true shining city on a hill, like they just get it, right? Mm-hmm. And that clarity of vision really is what's important. That's how I tend to get my co-conspirators. Like I collect people in positions of authority or influence, and I say, look, here's how it could be. Here's how we can turn this thing, or here's what we could turn this terrible nightmare mess into. Like this could be something that provides value instead of is thought of as just a tax on the organization. And mm-hmm. and that's how you do it. That's how you roll your ideas out there is you have a compelling vision, you sell it to the right people, and then they help you make it happen because they want it to happen too.
Mm. I love the shining city on the hill. I think that if there were one thing that I would want senior leaders to do, it's not running around looking busy, being in Zoom meetings. It's quietly knowing that vision each morning when they wake up. If they knew that and had 15-minute meetings every day about that shining vision on the hill, that to me is the work of leadership. Because there's other people to do the running around of leadership.
Yeah.
That and it's difficult to hold that shining vision on the hill in the midst of the busyness and running around. The one takes from the other. They're two different jobs.
They really are. It's funny. When you are getting into leadership or transitioning from like one level of leadership to another, it can be, especially if you think like middle management to upper management / that executive layer, especially, that's where it turns into, oh, right, I'm not really executing anymore. I'm holding the vision. I'm holding the strategy. And I'm making sure that the people that are executing are going in the right direction at all times. That's what I do. That's my job here, is holding clarity for the organization and maintaining that shared model of what it is we're trying to do here.
And any tips, like, because you've been doing that for some time, what tips do you have? Like, how should someone think about that as they're making the leap? Sort of, I'm thinking that's from like the director level to the VP level, or the, in some organizations it might be from the VP level to the C level. It depends on the size of the organization, but sort of to that visionary, it depends on the organization which level is visionary, but somewhere in there. How do you hold that for yourself?
Yeah, it's a constant battle of between the part of me that wants to go just make things happen and the part of me that knows, no, I need to be getting other people to do things because I cannot scale. And that's the thing that I have to keep reminding myself of. It is great. Everyone wants to feel needed. If we go back to the beginning where we were talking about how you start to lose feedback, a way to get that feedback for you is to just start doing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And fighting that inclination to do is really, like, I think the first thing that you need to lean into, because when you think about the things that you do, they take a lot longer, right? Like if I'm an engineer, I'm on a 2 week, I take 2 weeks to do something always. It's just 2 weeks over and over again. One step up from that might be a month or a quarter. A step up from that might be 6 months. And then you start to get into that 1, 3, 5, 10, 20 year vision level where like you are doing something all the time for the next 20 years and holding that for the organization. So really step back from wanting to find the things that you can go write, or the tickets you can go update, or the code that you can go, review. And instead just take one step back and look at the forest from the trees, and resist the urge to just constantly do.
I have talked to so many new leaders, new being whatever the new position is, not that they're brand new leaders. And so many times they have this feeling they've stopped doing the tactical and they're like, oh, what if somebody notices I'm not providing value to the organization? That's always their first fear. What if I get fired because I'm not doing anything?
Been there.
And then they're like, and then it's like, well, you are, I promise you are. And then they get really busy, because you're right. It is a trap. It's like, this is the trap. The trap is you can get I've never seen this trap before. I love that we're talking about this. The trap is that if you need that affirmation, if you step back into doing something tactical that you know really well, someone's going to go, oh my gosh, Greg, you're so good at this. And you are, because you've done it for years. And then you get the positive affirmation, but then all of a sudden you start doing tactical things again, and no one's holding the vision of the city on the hill.
Exactly.
Oh, my heart breaks. It like breaks for the new leader. It breaks for the organization that no longer has anyone holding the vision on the hill. Like, it's heartbreak all over the place.
I feel like our coaching sessions since I started at Solar Winds sound similar to the conversation we're having right now.
Oh, it's not that bad. You're doing a great job stepping into a new role. But I think it's important to name this agony of the new role. There is agony. There is some agony in the new, in leadership. Brand new leadership, there's some agony. Stepping up a level, there's agony. Any new role, there's agony. There's something that you leave behind. And it's not just the problems of the previous role, which was probably somewhat safe because you the devil, and there is this sort of poignant agony of leadership.
Yeah, it's kind of also, in a way, a I want to say affirming. I'm like really trying to find the word for it, but there's a certain amount of pride that I take in learning to cope with that agony, which is really just uncertainty, right? Like nobody likes to not know. And learning to just hold that discomfort and to recognize it for what it is transformational. Because you can go through a day and you can say like, what am I doing here? Why did I leave? Why did I join? And really just you think about it and you're like, oh, right. No, this is just new. This is just newness. This is uncertainty. This is confusion. Okay, now we know what it is. Let's move on. Next.
Well, and woo-woo coaches in coach training, they always ask, it's not a question I use a lot with my techie, people who like more concrete questions, but coaches often ask a question, which is what's hard to be with?
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. Like it's hard to be with the gaps in time. It's hard to be with the not knowing. It's hard to be with the lack of constant affirmation.
Yes.
It's all those things are really hard to be with in a new role.
They really are.
Well, I don't want to let you leave without also asking about coaching.
Yeah.
Because I've never talked about coaching with a client on my show before. And I'm just curious about, that's not actually true, by the way. I don't want to make any of my previous clients who've been on the show, mad, but I am curious. You've invested in coaching for a long time. Yep. I'm curious about how you think about coaching, why you've invested in coaching, and kind of just, how you think about it for yourself.
Well, I think of you as kind of my work therapist. No, for me, I think people that see me do things might disagree with this, but nothing comes naturally for me. I train for everything that I do, and I try to be very conscious about it and deliberate. And when I'm doing something brand new, it is immensely helpful for me to work one-on-one with people. Like I used to dance. So like when I was doing ballet, like I got extra help from one of the teachers who took like an interest in me. Or when I was growing up, it was my mom. Or as I've been swimming, I'll stick around after practice for 5 minutes and say, hey, look, this is the thing that I'm kind of like thinking about while I'm swimming, and where I'm trying to like find swimming in my body and what to hold on to when I'm doing it. And because of how critical learning to lead is, like I was just like, I am going to pay money to have someone sit with me regularly and help me work through my problems of being a new leader and of learning how to continue to grow as a leader. Because right, it's not like suddenly I'm a great leader and I'm never going to improve again. It's that mindset of being of wanting to continuously get better at things and to be as good as I can. And so that's why I came to you. I felt lost, and a friend reached out and said, hey, you should talk to Melanie. And it's been transformative for me.
Yeah. And I don't know how long we've coached. It's been over 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
So it's been some time.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the initial reason was? What was the reason you hired a coach? What was the cue for someone? Again, it's not about hiring me, but about the coach in general. Like, what should someone be thinking when they hire a coach?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because for me, it was just sheer panic. I really got thrown into the deep end. I was at a really small startup, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, we need you to hire, 8, 10, 13 engineers and manage them and figure out how to make this all work. And I was like, okay, I'm going to read books. I'm going to talk to the people I know that are doing this. And there's like, at a certain point, you start to exhaust your resources, and you realize like, I don't have 6 months to teach myself how to be a leader. And no one here has time to hold my hand and walk me through this. And my friends are getting tired of me booking one-on-ones with them. So, finding someone dedicated to helping you learn how to do this very new, very different thing that you've stepped into is, it's all I could think to do.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want people to find you. Sometimes on my show at this point, I say things like, where would people find you? But if people had questions for you, would they find you somewhere or follow you somewhere?
Yeah, I'm Grepory on everything, Grepory, like Gregory, but with a P in the middle. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the things. I don't post as much anymore, but I do get on, check my notifications and DMs pretty regularly, and I'm always happy to chat with people about coaching, about leadership, about tech. Feel free to reach out.
Sounds great, and it's been really great to have you on the program. I want to mention, and I know that you're a little bit familiar with it, but again, my clients always inform the work that I do, and that panic moment that I've talked to so many people on that journey when they're panicked. And so one of the programs that I created was our Leadership Essentials program. And I'm really excited about that program. I actually was talking to someone who went through that program, and I was asking, they are signing some of their team up for it right now. And I said, well, why are you signing them up? And they were like, well, it's just what you said it is. It's Leadership Essentials. It's everything you need to know to lead a team. I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. And it really is. And so, I just want to put a shout out there for people who are in that place of feeling scared about leadership. If you want to reach me and want to know more about that program, our Leadership Essentials team talks about delegation and things like accountability, how to develop your team members. Like, how do you have a better team next year than you have today? Because if you don't develop them and they stay, then you're in trouble because your team isn't growing. So you really want to make sure your team is constantly growing. Send an email to me, melanie@experimentalleader.com. I'll be happy to get you information, talk to you, all of that. And I definitely want you to know about that program because it's near and dear to my heart. And I want people to suffer less in this leadership place. Oh my gosh, it breaks my heart that people suffer so much when they step into a leadership place. So thank you so much for being here, Greg. It's been really fun.
And the pleasure is all mine.
I hope that you're enjoying my show. And if you'd like to take a look at my book, The Experimental Leader, Be a New Kind of Boss to Cultivate an Organization of Innovators, I have a special deal for my podcast listeners. Go to book.experimentalleader.com and you can get a digital copy of my book for just $4.95. I hope you love it as much as I loved writing it. And I hope it helps you create your first experiments.
It's been so fun to be with you here today. And it was super fun to hear Greg talking about how his leadership journey has evolved. I just want to reiterate that idea of sharing thoughts. Sometimes it's a year before they happen. Sometimes it's 2 years. My example of the Unitarian Church, 20 years, that's a bit long. But you want to start to share your ideas, seed your environment with the things that you want to have happen. It helps you emerge as a thought leader, and it helps people see the things that you're interested in. Be a thinker, and then share those thoughts freely because it helps you in your career development, and it helps people see what you're interested in. I hope that you have an amazing week. Go experiment.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Experimental Leader. We hope you have found value in today's episode because we're dedicated to helping you become the experimental leader you want to be. To access the show notes or learn more about working with Melanie, visit melanieparish.com. Go experiment.